وصلي وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. So this is the first session of the Aqidah, the first level Aqidah course that I ran last year in May to August, as you can see in 2023, and now a year later we're going to run it again, and the next year run it again. By the end of next year, once I've run it 3 times, on the minbar I'll say, if you haven't attended the Aqidah course, please leave and go pray in some other masjid, yani find some other sheikh to follow. Because if you haven't attended the Aqidah course after 3 times of doing it, that means it's very important for you to know this part of your deen. And a first level Aqidah course is an Aqidah course that is not meant to be extremely complicated or difficult for you to understand, but rather something that allows you to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, know what it is, what your creed is, and what your deen stands for, and what is it you should be thinking or understanding within your life. And let me see if I can. Okay, there you go. So here's the course for this course specifically. There's a lot of slides, and the slides are not as fiqh is I just take a picture of a book and just slap it there and talk to you about stuff. Now Aqidah, I had to build these slides. It took a long time. It was very tiring for me because the Aqidah is taught in so many different ways across the world, and it's really no one way to do it. And I just decided that I was going to do it in a specific way, inshallah, to benefit the audience that is listening to me here in London, Ontario, Canada, 2024. So I had to build these slides for it. So your resource, if you're in the Google Classroom, amazing. If you're not, then talk to Sister Nada at the end of this session, so she adds you to the Google Classroom, because on the Google Classroom you'll have course material and references. So there'll be extra reading and some links that are important for you, and then these slides. These slides are basically what you're going to be depending on in studying for this course or learning the material. I don't really ask questions outside of the slides, and all of my exams are open book. I don't require you to memorize stuff. I need you to understand. And the questions and it'll be very obvious how you answer the question, whether you actually understood anything or studied or not. I look for answers where you are descriptive and you're taking time to explain things. It's like you're articulating your understanding through the words, and I read it, and if I feel like you understand what you're talking about, then you'll pass, and if you don't, then you'll fail. So what are we going to be doing in this course? It usually takes 13 to 14 sessions. I'm going to try and end it by the end of July if possible, which takes us to 12 sessions in total. So I may try and make it a little bit. You'll have these online. You don't have to take. So just get into Google Classroom. You have access to absolutely everything that you see here, plus a bunch of further readings and links and stuff that I'll share with you as we go along. I usually have 1 or 2 assignments within the course. They're usually not that nothing I do is very complicated at all. So don't worry about anything it's pretty easy. So we're going to aim to focus on the basics of Islamic theology, and point out the major issues of difference of opinion amongst the 3 schools of theology. All right, it's a level 1 course, so we're not going to dive into all of the issues and all of the difference of opinions. We're going to just pace on the major points that really are important for you to know in this time and in this era, in this age, in this time of our Islamic evolution as a faith, as an ummah. Maybe if we went back in history 1,000 years ago, those points would be different, and the things that I would focus on would be different based on the challenges. Theology is a challenge-based learning process, meaning there are certain things that you're going to learn in every theology class, every Aqidah class, but then there are points that may be based on kind of where you are in the world and when you are in the world, what challenges. So for example, 1,000 years ago, the theological challenges were all based on other Abrahamic faiths, meaning the arguments of Jews and Christians. Today, that's not really the problem for Muslims. Today, the arguments are from the atheists and from those who claim to be scientists or who follow scientism, basically, today, which is why we'll connect. We will we will focus on those type of arguments, and I won't spend too much argument with the other Abrahamic faiths, because most Muslims don't really have that struggle. Like, most Muslims aren't thinking, maybe this faith is better, maybe that's faith. No, the majority of Muslims don't have that struggle. If you have a faith-based struggle, it's with either having a faith or not. And that's just the timing that we're living in. So that's the focus that I'm going to have. I'm not saying that no one has these other struggles. I'm just saying the majority of people don't. And that's based on large surveys done by larger institutions that I just take the data from them. So it'll be anti-faith arguments. The course will have mandatory virtual material that will be a part of the assessment and course marks, and then we will connect the articles of faith to practices and behaviors, as the discipline was always meant to be. So really, Aqidah is not supposed to be boring and dry. Even though that's how people usually perceive this discipline. I'm going to try my best to make it practical for you, because that's the point of Aqidah. Aqidah is something you learn and then it's going to affect your behavior and influence your practice. And if it doesn't, then I don't know exactly why you're learning it. So I'm going to try my best to do that for you, inshallah ta'ala, throughout the entirety of this course. Now, the virtual material, which we will share with you, inshallah, in the course material, is going to be a link to a series that I did called Facing Disbelief. I did this not last year in Ramadan, the year Ramadan, for 7 episodes, so around 7 hours of material. It's mandatory to listen to, right? And you're going to have a check mark where you have to put in if you listen to or not. So if you lie, that's your problem. You have bigger problems than my course if you're lying in the Aqidah course. And if you're truthful, then you just you watch it and you put the check mark that you listen to it. But if you don't, then you don't pass the course. Like you absolutely can't. So you have to watch the series, not because I'm trying to promote myself, no, because I did that series specifically for this course. Like I did the series, and when I did the series, my whole point of doing it was that this was going to be a supplementary material for the course that I want to run later on, so that I don't end up making the course that I'm running too convoluted and too long, and then going into so many anti-faith arguments and going into illogical fallacies and talking about stuff that maybe takes away from knowing God. Knowing Allah is what we're going to be focusing on. We're here to know who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, so that you have that connection, that you're able to comprehend it. So I need you to listen to the course, and there'll just be a place where you can say, yep, I listened to it, check mark, and that's all I need, and that'll add up to a certain amount of marks that for everybody, and there'll be one assigned. So actually the last year's course, we asked people to transcribe a certain amount of time, just to prove that they listened to it. I'm not going to be this mean this year around, so I won't ask anyone to transcribe anything. Just listen to it and just put the check mark that you did, inshallah, at the end of the course, bid'nillah ta'ala, which will be at least another 12 or 13. So you have a long time to do it. All right. So who's Imam Abu Ja'far Ahmad al-Tahawi, which is the metin, the text that we're going to be studying. It's called Metin al-Tahawiyya, the Tahawiyya Creed, or the text of Imam al-Tahawi. Imam al-Tahawi is a early Muslim scholar. You can see he was born in the 3rd Islamic century. He is Hanafi in terms of his madhab. He was Shafi'i first, and he turned into Hanafi for reasons that you can go read online. It's a really nice story. Go read the story if you want. But he wrote this creed, this metin, this text in Islamic creed, in Aqidah, that has lived on. It's 1,200 years running strong. It's still the best metin that's ever been written in Aqidah. It's not perfect. Like, it's not the perfect metin. There are a lot of things that when we read it, I'll point out, we can ignore this piece because it's way too detailed and there's some controversy here we don't need. But it still carries its merit till this day in terms of how it was written and what it talks about. Now, I am not going to read it syllable by syllable and just explain that. No, I'm going to do a lot of explanation, and then we go and read within the metin, and in the reading will reflect what we've learned within the slides that I talked about. That's how I'm going to do it. So instead of just reading and then explaining in depth, I'm going to explain to you certain aspects of i'tiqad, then we go read 2 or 3 pages that reflect what it is that we already talked about. At the end of this course, if you want a sanad, like if you want a chain of narration in Matn al-Tahawiyya, you can, and you have to pass the course and then come to me and book a timing where you can recite the metin in Arabic to me. You have to sit down and recite it properly in Arabic, and I'll give you a sanad if you want. There may be involved with that a few oral questions to make sure that you actually understand what you're talking about. But if you pass the course and you have a good mark, then I don't necessarily need to do that. This is a little bit of a breakdown of who Imam al-Tahawi was. You can read that whenever you want. It's not a part. So different names of the discipline of theology or aqidah. These are the names throughout the centuries that were used to describe this discipline that we're learning, i'tiqad. We call it ilm al-aqidah today. Is the name that kind of is most famous, but they also used ilm al-tawheed as a word, as a title or a name for it. They used ilm al-iman as a name for it. They called it ilm al-fiqh al-akbar, and that's actually what Abu Hanifa himself called it for the longest time. Al-fiqh al-akbar, the largest discipline of fiqh. Fiqh is specific knowledge. That's what fiqh is. Today, again, we use fiqh to refer to jurisprudence and aspects of halal and haram, but fiqh is just specific knowledge. Fiqh al-akbar, the most important specific knowledge, which kind of is reflective of that. Ilm usul al-din, the origins of religion, and ilm al-kalam, which is probably the most controversial of names, but it is the name that theology was called for the longest period of time, because kalam is talk, is how we would translate it today, but kalam is also another word for discussion or argument. And again, going 1,000 years back into history, when it was called ilm al-kalam, it's because you have to learn mantiq, you have to learn enough logic, because you're going to be arguing people who are going to be arguing against your faith using certain fallacies or aspects of logic, so you have to be equipped to be able to argue back. And there was a lot of arguments going back and forth. Islam is a faith that does not have intellectual dictatorship within it. There is room for people to think, which is why for the first maybe 500 years, he had all these different subgroups within Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah and beyond as well, that had different understandings of i'tiqad. Like they had certain opinions within i'tiqad, and they had little names. Most of them fizzled out historically. Al-Jabriyya wal-Qadriyya, a lot of them just stopped existing. They're not here today. There are remnants of their ideas that exist in i'tiqad, but they ceased to exist because their arguments couldn't stand up against the main argument, which is the argument that we have today. The i'tiqad that we have today is the argument that basically survived the millennium, survived the test of time and the test of arguments. There was no intellectual dictatorship. Like there was no one who was saying, this is what we're going to believe. There's no imam, there was no like a hakim, there was no political dictator that decided this is what people are going to believe and everyone had to believe it. No, it was open, people discussed. If you had a better argument, your argument would live longer. For Mu'tazila, for example, a well-known group that had a lot of Islamic theology influence throughout the centuries, they don't really exist anymore. Like I've been to a few of their masajid in Damascus, but they're very small groups, maybe in the thousands. Like the number of people who are still following that way of thought, maybe a couple of thousands. Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah are 1.5 billion. So there's a large difference in terms of what things just fizzle out of time through time, just based on the argument not being able to carry its own merit. But I want to share with you that all of these names are appropriate. Ilm al-Kalam is not wrong. It's not wrong. Even though there are scholars who say, who push you away, don't get involved in Ilm al-Kalam. The reason they would say that is more because what they're pointing out is don't invest when you're learning Tawheed or learning i'tiqad into these tertiary subgroup arguments amongst different faiths to the point where you get lost, where you don't know, you lose focus of why it is you believe in God to begin with. Don't get so focused on these debates to the point where you don't understand what your belief system is. And if you get too focused on detailed debates, you can end up entering, as you will see throughout this course, that there are points where once you enter to argue, you are in no man's land. You are saying words that have really no meaning to them. You're just saying stuff. You're saying words that no one can understand because you have no experience of it. So you start arguing abstract concepts of the divine, it's impossible for people to understand what you're saying. You don't even understand what you're saying. It just becomes words, and that's why words kalam. It becomes it's just kalam. There's no realities to it. So we have to be able to know where our ability to seek knowledge ends. That's what theology teaches. Here's where the line is drawn. We don't have the ability to learn that. Not because again, listen to Facing Disbelief. This is not the God of holes or of lack of knowledge. Wherever we don't know something, we say that God did. No, this is where philosophically the human mind can't go beyond something. For example, are you able to imagine something that has no time? Like, are you able to imagine a scenario with no time, or no time and space, for example? Can you imagine anything? I can articulate. I can say time and space are two entities coming together. They're what we have. And I can imagine that maybe there's a realm where no time and space aren't there. But can I imagine it? Can I understand it? No. I can talk about it. I can articulate that. I can understand that these are concepts, and you can maybe fathom a place where that, or say even the word place, fathom a situation where that wouldn't apply, but I don't understand what that means. And if I start at falsaf, if I start talking about what it would look like, then you and I are going to enter into an area of argument that is just completely useless, which is why sometimes some of the books of i'tiqad you read, and you're like, I have no idea what they're saying anymore. And you maybe even ask the guy who wrote it, and he's like, I forgot what I meant when I said this. Like it's so detailed and difficult, so we have to be careful. So the three schools of creed. This may be the most controversial thing that I'll do in this whole course by far. So it's okay if you feel uncomfortable as I talk about it, and feel free to even ask me or talk to me later on as we go through. But this is my view, and this is my understanding of how Islam works. And this is the fiqh of this masjid. This is how we go by things. That just like there are 4 schools of jurisprudence and fiqh, there are 3 schools of i'tiqad within the Muslim ummah of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. There are 3 schools of i'tiqad, and they're up there. So you have the Ash'ari school, the Maturidi school, and the Athari or Salafi or late Hanbali school. All of them are schools of theology, ways of understanding aspects of belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And unfortunately, for the last maybe 700 or 800 years, it's been an ongoing fight between these schools to the point where the number of PhDs and master theses that have been written on these differences are enough to build a dam to close down the Nile. The amount of effort that's been put into this is beyond what I can even begin to explain to you. And what they're arguing, in essence, when you actually take, okay, what are we arguing here? The details that they're arguing, that most human beings on this planet do not have the capacity to comprehend what's being said to begin with. Like, it's so complicated that it's hard for someone who does not have a philosophical background or a theological background to understand why this matters to begin with. And I've tried this before because I spent a lot of my younger years doing exactly that, just arguing these points. And the school of thought of the teachers who educated me, the school of thought that I ended up with, that I stuck with, was a school of thought that looked at the 3 schools of i'tiqad the way we look at the 4 schools of jurisprudence. And just like 1,000 years ago, the 4 schools of jurisprudence were not seen the way they're seen today. Today, if you're a Hanafi madhab or Hanbali madhab or Maliki madhab or Shafi'i madhab, you're welcome and you're not wrong. And whatever you're doing it has merit and you're welcome to do it. That's not how it was seen 1,000 years ago. It wasn't seen that way. People would fight and they would say one is right and the other is wrong, and it took a while for the Muslim mind to evolve to the point to understand that there is room for these difference of opinions to exist, which is what we came to today, that there are 4 schools of thought. It doesn't mean that there can't be a 5th, but we don't have a 5th, we just have these 4, and within them there's 100,000 scholars in each school of thought, of jurisprudence, and they took the evidence and they studied it and they extracted from it opinions, and here are the opinions that they came to, and you're welcome to take any of these schools and follow them. And you can't just pick and choose unless you're a scholar yourself, meaning you know all of the evidence, you know how to extract rulings out of evidence, and if you don't, you just take one school and you follow it. Today, this is how the mature Muslims and Muslim scholars across the world, this is what they preach. Very soon, inshallah, we're going to come to the point where this is how we're going to see, inshallah, the 3 schools of theology within the Muslim Ummah, that they all have merits. They all have arguments. So each of these schools are valid, and the scholars who differed regarding certain aspects of creed differed within the boundaries of what is considered appropriate for scholars to differ upon, and regarding topics that holy text was not decisive about. I need you to read this sentence 50 times until you understand what it means and it's clear to you. And if you understand Arabic, then just read the one under it. اجتهدوا فيما لم يحسمه النص ويسوغ فيه الاجتهاد. They did their ijtihad in issues that text was not decisive and where it's appropriate for there to be difference of opinion. And they didn't differ as common men. They differed as scholars of creed. As is important to understand, you are not qualified to differ upon issues of fiqh. Like, you're not qualified to come and argue a mas'ala of fiqh unless you have been educated within a madhab to its peak, meaning you've studied a primary madhab, primary text in that madhab, a secondary, a tertiary, and then you studied the mu'tamad, meaning you've studied the largest collection that they have, and you have an actual certificate that you're able to, and then you're allowed to argue within the madhab. You're not even allowed to argue outside of the madhab. You have to argue within that school of jurisprudence. So for you to have a personal opinion outside of your personal choice is really not appropriate. Like, you can have one for yourself, like, I listen to these opinions, this is what I want for myself, no problem. For you to be arguing it outside of schools is not appropriate unless you have that degree of knowledge. And this is very important to understand. And the same thing applies for theology, if not heavier. For fiqh is much more laid back. Fiqh is halal and haram. Practicing is practice. Practice has changed over the centuries. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent prophets with different books and different practices all throughout time. There's, by default, flexibility there. Theology, there's no flexibility. What Adam alayhi salam taught his children is what Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam taught his children and followers. It's exactly the same. What Isa brought and what Musa brought, there's no difference in any of it. So it's much more rigid, right? So something that much more rigid, you shouldn't be arguing without being of a level of knowledge within theology that allows you to do so. So we have to be careful with these things. Actually, when you meet scholars, you will find that scholars from one of these schools, any of these schools, don't really have animosities, or they don't believe that scholars from other schools are wrong and should be. It's students. It's always students. It's always students who have learned a little bit, and they get all upset and they get up in arms and they start going after each other, and then we end up with a saga that goes on for 700 years. It's still going on. We still have thesis after thesis of how the Ash'aris are wrong and how the Salafis are wrong and how these are Mujassima and these are Mufawwida and these are Mu'attila, and they use all these names and all these words that are designed to demean other groups of Muslims who have merit-based arguments for why they understand things the way they understand. I'm going to explain them to you. I'm going to explain to you where at least the major difference of opinion points. The minor ones, it's up to your, it's going to be left to your interest level. Like if you want to go to come and attend a second level of Aqidah where I can go into depth in terms of where they differ, but you don't need to. To be able to function as a Muslim, you just need a first level. I believe you need to know the difference between these three schools today to function. I don't think you can afford not to. I don't believe in bringing you and teaching you a book of i'tiqad based on one school and not making you aware of the others, because I'm actually preparing you to go and fight with people. I'm preparing you to clash heads with people. I'm preparing you to not properly understand how Islam actually works. So I have to let you know. I can have my opinion. I may share with you my opinion on certain topics, and I may not. It doesn't really matter. And you can have one. You can say, well, I was taught i'tiqad years ago, and it was more on the Salafi. That's fine. You're welcome to have that opinion. The only issue is you have to understand that there is merit for arguments on the other side as well. And if, for example, you study Jawharat al-Tawheed and you're Ash'ari, that's fine as well. It's just a matter of being able to understand. And for i'tiqad, we need that as Muslims for sure. So this is probably the most, go back and read this a few times. And if you have questions, you're welcome to ask me. Don't worry, whatever you ask me, I've been asked worse. And whatever you accuse me of, I've been accused of worse. If you can top it, then I'll take you out for lunch. If you can tell me something that I haven't heard before, then I'll be impressed in what you have to tell me. But this is how I'm going by this, and I'm going to explain to you the different opinions of all three and where they come from. And if I have a preference, I'll say I think this is a better opinion than that one. It doesn't mean that you can't have the other one. It's just it'll be my preference, and sometimes I'll share that with you, and sometimes I won't. All right, we got through that. MashaAllah. Last time someone actually barged out. But this time, this is the person. This is good. This is a better. Last time, in the midst of this, someone stood up and just walked right out and never came back again. And I tried to get in touch and say, "Come back and just chat with me. Don't get too upset." And they refused. They said they went around saying things, and Allah yahdihum. It's unfortunate that we're at that place in our. We haven't. It's unfortunate. But hopefully with proper education and good understandings of things, we can become a bit more open-minded. We can still have opinions and we can still stick to them. We can have beliefs, but we can still understand that I get where that's coming from, and that's not totally wrong in where it comes from. And that's what we need as an ummah. You need unity, and we need that open-mindedness. So here's a good example of what I'm trying to talk about. So Imam al-Tahawi, right? He wrote his creed. So these are two books that explain the Tahawiyya, written within 12 years of one another, right? Within 12 years of one another. One was written by Imam al-Ghaznawi al-Hindi, which is an Ash'ari explanation of the Tahawiyya, and the other one was written by Ibn Abi al-Izz al-Hanafi al-Dimashqi, which is a Salafi explanation, within 12 years of one another. Meaning this guy here wrote it, he died around 770 Hijri. This guy here died around 790 Hijri. So maybe 20 years tops or less than that. So this is an example that if I could take either of these books and explain the Tahawiyya for you from one of them, and that way I'd be cheating you from actually understanding how things work, because it's easy for me to just ignore one of these books and just say, okay, that one doesn't exist, I'm going to focus on that one, when it's really not fair. And both of these approaches have existed as for almost an equal amount of time, and they just have different ways of going by things. And I will explain them to you. Like, I'm not going to keep you in the dark. I'll explain where it comes from, and inshallah you'll feel much more comfortable with this topic at the end of this course, inshallah ta'ala. So let's take the three types of Tawheed according to the Salafi or Athari or late Hanbali school. So they look at Tawheed, when they talk about Tawheed, they divide it into three ways. They look at Tawheed in three categories. Again, these early slides are important, so I will commonly throughout this course, go a quick tick, 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 back to one of them and say, just take a look at that. So that's where we're coming from, because these early slides have a lot of information in them. So they're information heavy. I put them up front so that you have time to read them. If you need to read them more than once until you understand what's being said, and if you have questions, you have the opportunity to ask. So we have three types of Tawheed: Al-Rububiyyah, Al-Uluhiyyah, and Tawheed al-Asma' wal-Sifat. That's how they go by. That's how they categorize understanding the science of theology. So Tawheed al-Rububiyyah is singling out Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the exalted, with the actions of creation, providing sustenance, giving life, causing death, all types of regulation, administration of the dominion of the heavens of the earth, also singling him out as the exalted, the one who is not paralleled, or the one who makes no mistakes. With his right or his ability to pass judgment and legislation, sending messengers and giving books. That's what Rububiyyah. Rububiyyah is what he does, subhanahu wa ta'ala. We form Tawheed, and I'm going to talk about Tawheed today in some degree of depth, so don't worry, I'm not going to leave that word hanging for you. But they look at Tawheed al-Rububiyyah as a Lord who is controlling and giving and teaching and providing and all that. Al-Uluhiyyah is the way I understand it, is Rububiyyah is what he is doing, subhanahu wa ta'ala, as al-Wahid al-Ahad. Al-Uluhiyyah is what we have to do in return. So Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah is singling out Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with worship and service from our side. Like, what is it that is required from my side? That no one besides him is worshipped, no one besides him is called upon. You don't see rescue or aid except from him. Obviously, in essence, Allah al-Razzaq, he is a provider. But if I'm your employer, I'm kind of providing for you too. But not in essence. In essence, it's Allah. In abstractly or figuratively, I'm doing it. So if I'm in trouble and I come ask, please help me, that's kind of figuratively asking you for help. But in essence, it has to be asked for. I mean, so we have to know the difference of words here. In essence, the one who rescues, the one who you seek service from, you seek aid from, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Figuratively, you can seek it from other people. It's just the way you understand it is that it's coming from Allah through someone else. But it's coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Does that make sense? So we have to understand the usage of word, because it's not saying that you sit there and drown and refuse to ask anyone to help you. Don't throw me a lifeline. I'm asking Allah and then you drown, and you meet Allah and say, well, I asked you, well, I sent you a guy with a bloody lifeline just to have him to pick it up and go. So it's not. So the issue is understanding the essence of words and the figurative usage of words, and that's a big piece, and we're going to talk about that throughout this course multiple times because it matters a lot. And then Tawheed, so no one is sacrificed or slaughtered for or made an oath for except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah is what you do in response to the fact that there is Tawheed al-Rububiyyah. So Tawheed al-Rububiyyah is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing for you. He provides for you, He created you, He puts life and death, all that. Al-Uluhiyyah is what I do because of that, which is service and seeking aid and all the other rulings that come with it. And then Tawheed al-Asma' wal-Sifat is a Tawheed of describing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Most High, and naming Him with whatever He described and named Himself with. Whatever He chose to describe Himself with, whatever names He used for Himself, we use those names. And whatever His Messenger ﷺ described and named Him with in authentic narrations. And to affirm that for Allah without resemblance to creation or likeness to creation, and without false interpretation of any of that or negation of any of that, as He did for Himself. And I put that in blue because we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to talk about that a little bit here, because that's where a lot of the difference of opinion gets heavy, because of this sentence and understanding what that sentence means and how others interpret that sentence a little bit differently, right? This is suddenly becoming very sensitive. Probably because of the course material. No, don't worry. With time, it'll become much more. You'll become comfortable with this, and you'll start to actually think about things, and you'll start to appreciate the beauty of Islamic creed and the way the Muslim mind thought, and how everyone's goal is one, is exalting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All three schools, all the Ash'aris, the Maturidis, the Salafis, all of them, their goal is to exalt Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They just take different approaches to how to do that, and they end up with different conclusions within where it's acceptable for that to be the case. So just read this again with me. So describing Allah with that which He described Himself with, and with whatever His Messenger ﷺ described Him with, that is authentic. And to affirm that without resemblance to creation, we affirm that the way He described Himself without saying that He's resembles his creation or is like a creation. Allah is Sami', right? He is the all-hearing, but not like the way I hear. So I affirm that he hears, but it's not the way I do. I have an outer ear and middle ear and inner ear, a cochlea. I have all these little things that work out, and it goes into my brain, and my brain basically processes information. That's how I understand what's being said. That's not how he hears, subhanahu wa ta'ala. How does he hear? That's where the no man's land is. That's no man's land. That's where people start, that's ilm al-kalam. That's where you start arguing stuff that no one knows. No one knows. You can make up, who knows? I can barely understand how I hear. We can barely understand how our ears work. To understand how the divine hears is completely insane. But that insanity is going to come up time and time again throughout this course. So buckle up. And then without false interpretation of any of that, so without falsely interpreting what those false, not without interpretation, without false interpretation. This is what I'm not adding that. That's actually what is said in the books of Tawheed. That's what it says in this book. In this book, this is what it says, without false interpretation, not without interpretation at all, because you cannot actually understand i'tiqad without a degree of interpretation, right? It's required. So slow. And or negation of any of that by saying that you said this, and I'm going to negate it altogether. And that piece we will talk about, inshallah, in depth. So describing Allah according to the Ash'ari and Maturidi schools, they have a different breakdown. So Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, Uluhiyyah, and Asma' al-Sifat is what the Salafi mindset, or the Salafi way of looking at it, the Athari way of looking at it is. There was three breakdowns. For the Ash'ari Maturidi, it's a little bit different. They have different breakdowns of explaining Allah subhanahu. We will use this methodology, and we will refer back to the Athari way as we go along, as we explain Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes, because this is really not an issue of difference of opinion. Like, there's nothing wrong with this breakdown. The difference of opinion exists in a different realm altogether. This breakdown is a little bit more in depth. So we have the existential attribute, sifa nafsiyya, which is called al-wujud, the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm going to explain all these to you. And then the attributes of denial, sifat al-salbiyya, the five, al-wahdaniyya, al-qidam, al-biqa, mukhalafatu lil-hawadith, qiyamuhu min-nafs, and I'll explain all of those to you, inshallah, in English. The oneness, pre-eternality, everlasting, unlikeness to creation, subsistence, I should be able to say this word after 3 years of teaching this, and the personal attributes, so sifat al-ma'ani, which is life and knowledge and will and power and hearing and seeing and speech, and then the action-related attributes, so sifat al-af'al, the exclusive attributes, sifat al-jamia. So we'll go through these sifat or attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll use this methodology. We will always go back to the Athari breakdown because they all belong to one of these. Any of these examples here belong into one of these three categories. So it's just a matter of whether we study it through these three categories or the five here. I just use the five here because they're a little bit easier for me in terms of breaking things down as we go along. Again, these slides are paramount slides in this course. I will always go back to these slides as we kind of move along and kind of point out things that we talked about at the beginning to help you comprehend. Really understanding these slides, these first 4 or 5 slides is what's going to be the end result or the outcome of what you're going to know. So now let's take a step back. Yes.
In the previous slide.
Yeah.
The one before. So would Tawheed al-Asma and Wasifat be related to Rububiyyah? I mean, wouldn't we understand what applies to these names?
No, so Rububiyyah is affirming actions, affirming the fact that he's the one who does certain things and no one else does. Asma' al-Sifat is his attributes. Attributes as in affirming an attribute, not an action. It's a little bit different. An action is one thing, and then affirming an attribute or affirming a name is something different. Accepting the name as is, as explained, as put in the book, or as pointed out by the Prophet ﷺ, that's one thing. Accepting that the outcome of that name is applying to you is a rububiyyah, they're a little bit different. And you'll see the difference as we go along. Like with a little bit of patience, you'll see that the difference is monumental in terms of, because there's no difference of opinion on this one here amongst all Muslim schools of thought, right? No difference of opinion on this one here either, amongst all schools of thought. All the differences here. That's all. Same thing here. And when you go over here, no problem. All no problem. And then we start talking a little bit more. So the early ones, no problem. We all agree fully on that. And then it kind of starts to change. Then we start, the last three, we have difference of opinion on how to interpret, how to understand certain phrases that are being said. And what do they mean? I will make it clear to you, inshallah ta'ala. You won't, if you go attend the course and listen, you won't have confusion, inshallah, at the end of it. It's just a matter of kind of being patient as we go along. It is a material heavy course. Aqeedah is probably the most, or is usul fiqh? Is usul fiqh more? Usul fiqh is more, right? Usul fiqh is more. Yeah, so I'll take that. But usul fiqh has more material in it. But aqeedah is probably more controversial material. I'll put it that way, depending on what background. Because if you were educated in i'tiqad, the likelihood that you were taught it this way is very low, unfortunately. The likelihood that you were taught it from one group that completely ignored the existence of the other groups altogether, or pointed them out as completely wrong, everything they were saying, is the higher likelihood. And that, to me, is the essence, or the source of the problem. The source of the problem is that lack of acknowledgement that no, maybe you can differ on things. It's like teaching fiqh. Same thing. I'll sit down and I'll explain the fiqh Hanbali, for example, and this is their opinion. But the Hanafis and Malikis saw this, and this is their argument. I don't necessarily agree with it, but it does have merit. I mean, it does have a logical thought continuum that you could entertain if you, in the right position, you would probably, it makes sense as well. It makes sense as well. But I think this is more, it makes more sense. And there are stuff in Islam that are designed to be like that. For that sa'ah, for that openness, because Islam is not a line, it is a river. There are banks of that river. Once you can end up outside the river. It's not an infinite width. There are banks, and you can end up outside, no, for sure. But it is a river. So maybe I'm swimming in this lane, you're swimming in that lane. We're all right. We're all right. So really, i'tiqad, I'm trying to show you, here's the river of theology. Here are the 3 lanes you can be in, no problem. Here's where you're outside. Here's where the banks kind of end, which is why you have to listen to Facing Disbelief piece. So you have to listen to that. Again, I'm stressing this because if you leave this till the last couple of days and it's 7 hours of material, you're going to not be very happy at the end. You have to, so listen to it slowly as you go along. There's a lot of material in it, and hopefully you'll find it helpful, especially if you're someone who listens to faith debates, which I don't always encourage people to do, because it can confuse you if you don't have the proper foundation for it. But it will give you some argument points if you're in the midst of kind of trying to convince someone of faith, or someone's challenging yours. It'll give you some argument points, inshallah. This, what I'm teaching here, is not going to be specifically doing that. No, that's why I made the course, the extra material, to focus on that piece, because I think that's important. Here, I want you to know at the end of this, which is the majority of our time, is knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have to know, my job is to tell you who Allah is. And that means that we have to take some deep thought and understanding who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, because we cannot see Him, we cannot touch Him, we cannot smell Him, we cannot hear. We lack that human connection. So then we have to, it's going to be based on seeing effect and based on contemplation. And that's going to require us all to kind of take some time and think, and to understand the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to actually appreciate Him, and then that will affect, inshallah, your behavior. That's why, at the beginning of this course, I take a moment and, well, not a moment, it's more than a moment, we talk about Tawheed. Because before I even start beginning to describe Allah, why is Tawheed so important? It's one of the names of the discipline of theology is Ilm al-Tawheed. That's one of the names of this discipline. They call it Ilm al-Tawheed, because by far, if you were to take any scholar, any Muslim scholar, regardless of their background, and just ask them a question, what is the most important piece of Islam? Across the board, Tawheed. Immediately, it's not even if you had to break Islam down just to one word, it's not going to be peace or submission, which are the translation of the word. It's going to be Tawheed. It's going to be the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inna Ibrahima kana ummatan qanitan lillahi hanifan wa lam yakun min al-mushrikeen. This is very clear in the Quran that the issue is the lack of shirk and the concept of Tawheed. So there's no disagreement upon that amongst any of the schools of Islamic thought, all across the board, historically and today. This is something that is across the board accepted. Now, why is it so important? That has to be a question that you ask yourself, and if you haven't, then you haven't been doing a very good job in thinking about your own faith. And then the question is, if you ask yourself, why is it so important? Do you have an answer? Why is it so important? Why is it believing in one God versus believing in 3 or 4 so important that this is the only thing that's not going to be forgiven, or this is the literal essence of what Islam is? And I can tell you that I've surveyed on this in the past many times, and I did like a full study on it, and the majority of Muslims have no idea. Not even a clue. Not even a clue of why. They'll say, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded, which is correct. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded, for sure. Because He said this in the Quran, for sure. I'm asking why. I'm asking why is it that He said this is the most important piece. I'm not saying explain to me what he explained is the most important piece. I agree. I'm asking you to understand why. Out of everything, he said, this is the thing that you have to know. And you cannot come to me without it. Come to me with whatever you want. Make all the mistakes that you're going to make. Just don't come with lack of tawheed. Don't present yourself to me on the day of judgment and you don't have tawheed, because that's going to be a problem. Everything else, and it can be argued. So the oneness of your source of values and rulings, leading to the consistency of ethics and behaviors. I put it right there. I usually run like an hour and a half session and then tell you this right at the end. I'm very mean when I run this course in another way. But for the purpose of this academic course, I'm going to put it right up front because I need you to take time and contemplate this sentence. This sentence is very, very important. The oneness of your source of values and ethics, right? And having one source will lead to consistency of those ethics and behaviors that will come later. Surah Al-Ikhlas breaks down Tawheed, right? That's what it's called Ikhlas. It's the only surah in the Quran that's name is not in its text. The only one. Every other surah, the name is in the text somewhere, except this one. The name, not in the text. It's the name of it is the result of understanding the text. Like if you understand the surah, the result will be sincerity. You'll become genuine and sincere. That's why I'm saying i'tiqad is designed to affect your behaviors. If it doesn't, then it's boring and it's just like pieces of information. I'm just memorizing stuff. Then you weren't taught it properly. It has to affect your life because that's what the Quran tells us. It's the only time the Quran deviates from the system. The system is the name of the surah is going to be there. Al-Baqarah, right there. A couple of pages in, you find the story of Al-Baqarah. Ali Imran, the story of Ali Imran is there. It's the only time you find it. So you find these words, except this one. Yeah. And it's one of the most valuable surahs in the Quran, as we know. Ta'dilu thuluth al-Quran. It's like a third of the Quran. Now, some scholars took that as to read it 3 times, and that's okay, and I do that myself. But I think really the meaning of that is that it carries a third of the meanings of the Quran, which is understanding who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. So we'll stop with that. We'll go for Salat al-Maghrib, and then we'll continue, inshallah, right after the... I think there's a khatira tonight, so we'll listen to the khatira, and then we'll go after Salat al-Maghrib. Jazakumullah khair. Can someone make it down for us? Anyone? Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa alayhi wa wala. So the course starts at 8. I think some of you thought it was 8:30. I think that's a common... Yeah.
Find us here where I'm standing.
Okay, I think we probably put it 8:30 on an early poster, and we corrected it. So I'll start 8 sharp, and we'll go until it's an hour and 15 minutes. Maghrib comes in the midst, so we have to make up for the Maghrib. So we'll go to around 9:30ish, and just because Maghrib takes up around 15 minutes in the midst of it, but each lecture will be around an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. Unfortunately, I need a little bit more than an hour just to get through the whole material within the time that we've allocated for it. If you're taking the course and you're hoping to actually get the certificate at the end, then please just speak to Sister Nada to add you to the Google Classroom so you have access to all of the material that you're going to need to have access to. Sister Nada's over there. You can speak to her if you don't have if you're not signed up. And so you can have access to the lectures because the lectures are recorded and they're put online. So if you didn't show up for one of them or you attended one and some things weren't clear, you can go back and listen to them again. And if you're coming in a little bit late, I'm not going to repeat what we've talked about, but I highly encourage you, if you're attending the course, to go back today and once we upload it, to listen to the first half hour so that you're on the same page that we're all on, inshallah ta'ala, regarding the rest of the course. So we're going to talk about Tawheed a little bit for the next half hour. I'm going to talk to you about that. And this is the only time we're going to do this. After that, we're going to kind of go into talking about the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But why Tawheed is important is something that I believe is worthy of your time to contemplate. Let's start by talking about Surah Al-Ikhlas. Surah Al-Ikhlas breaks down all aspects of Tawheed. So Surah Al-Ikhlas breaks down the aspects of Tawheed, al-Rububiyyah, al-Uluhiyyah, wal-Asmat wal-Sifat. So قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, right? Allahu Samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. So قُلْ Allahu Ahad, that is Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah. Allahu Samad, that's Tawheed al-Rububiyyah. Lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad, that's Tawheed al-Asma' wal-Sifat. He is the pre-eternal. Lam yalid, meaning nothing comes after him. He does not bear children, meaning that nothing comes after him. Wa lam yulad, nothing came before him, so he's pre-eternal. Wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad, there's nothing that is similar to him. That's Tawheed al-Asma' wal-Sifat. It also contains within it all of these. الصفات السلبية. So قل هو الله أحد, that's the oneness. لم يولد, that's pre-eternality. Everlasting, لم يلد, meaning nothing comes after him. لم يكن له كفوا أحد, unlikeness to creation, and then Allah Samad is self-subsistence, meaning that He doesn't require any help from outside to exist. So Surah Al-Ikhlas breaks down al-sifat al-salbiyya, it has all of them, and it also explains to us the three types of tawheed, which is why, and the scholars of both schools of the three different schools of creed, they actually built their models of tawheed from Surah Al-Ikhlas. Like they went to Surah Al-Ikhlas and from looking at it, they decided that this is how they're going to build the model of understanding theology, which is why we have this model and then we have the other model. Both of them are very reasonable if you want to. You can use either of them to understand theology. I'm going to use this one just because it gives me the opportunity to go through each point specifically and break it down for you. It's just easier to do it that way than another way. So that's kind of the understanding. So take some time and reflect upon Surah Al-Ikhlas and how it kind of works in that regard. So when we talk about Tawheed, the Prophet ﷺ gives us all these examples. من كان آخر كلامه لا إله إلا الله دخل. Whoever says لا إله, the last thing that comes out of their mouth is لا إله إلا الله, ends up finding themselves in Jannah. لن يوافي عبد يوم القيامة يقول لا إله إلا الله يبتغي به وجه الله إلا حرم الله عليه النار. That no person will come on the day of judgment with Tawheed except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forbid him to be in the hellfire. إني لا أعلم كلمة لا يقولها عبد حقا من قلبه فيموت على ذلك إلا حرم على النار لا إله إلا الله. I know a word that if someone says and they say it and they mean it, then they will be forbidden to ever enter the hellfire, and it's لا إله إلا الله. So you find that this theme throughout the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ is very apparent. It's very apparent. There's over 25 authentic hadith that talk about the importance of kalimat al-tawheed, of saying la ilaha illallah. There is no God worthy of worship but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the hadith of Abu Talib, what the Prophet ﷺ asked of him, and the hadith regarding Musa alayhi salam, where he said, the hadith is in the collection of Ibn Hibban, and Musa alayhi salam would say, Ya Rab, allimni shay'an adhkurka wa ad'uka bihi. Tell me something, Ya Rabbi, when he spoke to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we'll talk about that piece specifically in Asma' wal-Sifat, Musa speaking to God. But when he spoke to him, he said, Ya Rabbi, teach me something that I say and I invocate you through and remember you through appropriately. So he said, قُلْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. So Musa said, كُلُّ عِبَادِكَ يَقُولُونَ هَذَا. Everyone says this. I was asking for something more specific for me. Like I wanted something very special. You know how it is. We all want to be special. So we wanted something special because everyone says, لا إله إلا الله. He wants something special for him. فقال سبحانه وتعالى, يا موسى لو أن السماوات السبع وعامرهن غيري والأرضين السبع في كفة ولا إله إلا الله في كفة مالت بهن لا إله إلا الله. If the cosmos and the earth, all of them and everything that exists within them were put in one scale, and La ilaha illallah, the other one, La ilaha illallah, would be heavier than everything else that I ever created. So the concept here is very clear, as you kind of. I'm trying to convince you that Tawheed is the most important part of the Deen. Just in case you're not convinced, I'm just trying to do that. That's the point of me doing this. I'm trying to argue for you that La ilaha illallah is the most important part of Islam. The concept of Tawheed is not trumped in Islam by anything. Nothing is prioritized higher than it. I'm just kind of proving that to you through the words of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And of course the Quran twice in Surah An-Nisa, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ. This is a very hopeful verse. People look at it as the opposite. It's very hopeful. He's saying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not forgive you arriving at the footsteps of His throne with lack of tawheed, with shirk, with association of other gods or deities or supreme powers aside from Him. But He will forgive literally everything aside from that. So this is very hopeful. It's not actually the opposite. I mean, imagine everything else has the potential of forgiveness. Everything else has the potential of forgiveness. Everything else. This is the only thing He's saying, just don't come with this. Just don't do this. It's twice in the Quran, don't come with shirk. Make sure you come with tawheed, right? So, of course, aside from the hope that we take from that everything else can be forgiven, so no matter what your past is, no matter what your history is, inshallah, you will find forgiveness if you work hard for it. But it also forces us to say, okay, well, why is it that this is the only thing that He won't forgive? There has to be a good reason. He told us that that's what He's going to do. We're not arguing that, obviously. Whatever He says, subhanahu wa ta'ala, is the truth and we accept it. What I'm asking is, do we understand why? Is there a reason for why this will not be forgiven? And that's what I'm trying to get you to think about, because it's important. This is the most significant piece of your creed as a Muslim. You have to understand why it's important. And if you don't, then there's a little bit of a discrepancy here that you should be concerned if you don't know why La ilaha illallah is so important in our deen. Come on. All right, so this is how I'm going to explain it to you, through the red lines concept. I'm going to explain it to you through this concept that I think helps kind of us comprehend the idea. Red lines as in the line that you can't cross. A line where this is drawn, here's a red line, Don't cross that line, right? Here's okay, on that side over there is not okay. And this exists all throughout human history. There's always red lines that are being drawn for people in general. So who draws the red lines, right? Who draws the red lines? And who should be allowed to draw these red lines? So I didn't put that slide. That's fine. So I'll explain this to you, then we'll move on. Because it has to be a question that I ask. If you are get told that this is the, for example, if you're driving in your car and it's 3:30 in the morning, you're coming from the hospital after 4 hours of trying to manage patients who are dying, and you're tired and you're hungry, and you're on Commissioner's Road and it's completely empty, and there's no one to be seen on either side of the road, and it's a red light. Do you stop or do you keep on going? And there's nothing there. Don't answer the question, because I don't want you to, this is a rhetorical question, right? Because you'll make me look bad. But do you stop or not? So the reason that you stop or you don't is based on whoever drew the line and said you are not allowed to cross a red line. This red light, sorry. That's how you're going to make this judgment. Is who said that I can't go through this red light, and the consequences attached to it. So if it's a person, it's some dude, then you're like, well, the person who did this is not superior to me, and they weren't probably, they meant this law to apply. You start rationalizing to yourself why I'm going to run through the red light at 3:30 in the morning to get home. But you're still wrong, but you rationalize it by saying, well, it's just a person. He's like me. He meant for this law to be followed at 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 in the afternoon where it's packed. But at 3:30 in the morning where no one's on the road, when you're standing there in front of a red light, you feel so dumb because there's nothing around you. It's like, just like you keep on going. So you start rationalizing for yourself, because the one who put I'm not encouraging you to do any of this. I'm just explaining to you what we do in terms of rationalizing stuff. We start asking the question, who said I can't do this? Well, the one who did it is just a person. They didn't necessarily mean this. They're not superior to me. They're a bunch of people. They probably didn't even foresee this situation that I'm in right now. So you start making these arguments, which allows you to push the red line a little bit. Go take a look at, it's 2024. Go look for, you can Google this online. Pictures from Canada from 1924. Right? And see how people dress, and see how people behave. And there's there's a difference between day and night. So what happened? The red lines were slowly moved. They're slowly moved of what is okay and what's not okay. Moved over a long period of time. Why? Because it all comes down to who we believe put those lines there. A Muslim, because he knows the one who put the line there is omniscient, is all-wise, you can't say, well, the one who put the line there is equal to me. Jalla Jalalullah. No. You can't say the one who put the line didn't know what I was going to see later on. No, he did. You can't say the one who put the line did it out of fun, because sometimes you're like, this rule is just because the person is too lazy. Like, there's no reason for this rule. It's a stupid rule. I'm not going to follow it, even if I have to pay a fine, right? You can say that sometimes. But he didn't. All the rules they put there are for your benefit. So that's why you can pick up a Muslim and parachute him to any place and any time. And shirk will be haram, and zina will be haram, and qatl will be haram, and sariqa will be haram, and ghiba will be haram, and kadhib will be haram. They'll all be haram. It doesn't matter where you drop them. Immediately those lines apply, because those lines were not put by some person, by some dude, by some committee, by a bunch of people. It was put by the divine himself, who doesn't change. And that's what Tawheed is about. That is why Tawheed is so important, because your ethics, your values that you live by, they're not subject to change. They're not variable, because the source isn't variable. This is what it means to be Muslim. This is what it means to be muwahhid. You're muwahhid, that means your values are set. Nothing affects them. If you have a constant source of values, you'll have constant values, you'll have constant ethics and behaviors. Very simple. If you have a variable or multiple sources, you have a lot of sources, why is it fun to have for shirk? Why does shirk work? Why is shirk lucrative? Well, kids know that shirk is lucrative. Kids do. Children do. If mom said no, maybe Baba won't. Right? It works on me all the time. My kids do it all the time. I'm too tired to argue. Right? Mom said no. He comes to me, can I do this? Just do whatever you want. Just get out of my room and close the door. Because they know shirk is helpful. Tawheed is difficult. If it's one source, then they said no, so there's no arguing, right? I need associates. I need a spokesperson. I need someone who can say, don't worry, I take care of that piece of the puzzle. He doesn't really care about that. I need someone. Give me some room. Give me something. I need to be able, I want some flexibility to these lines. Can I push the line? Just an exemption. Just one time. Can I just make this just once? Can you? Yeah, I can give you an exemption to this rule, because Tawheed is boring. And Tawheed is constant. And Tawheed is not lucrative. And Tawheed is freeing. It frees people. Tawheed leaves no room for people to make money off other individuals. There's no way for you to manipulate masses with Tawheed because it's one constant source that gives one constant group of values that result in the same ethics and behaviors. Pick up the person, drop them wherever you want. Muslims put them anywhere in the world. They come together, they build a masjid, they have a Jum'ah. Unfortunately, that's not the values, those are the practices. Unfortunately, those are the values or the practices. We follow the practices, but we miss the importance of the values, and they're different things. Rulings, laws, jurisprudence practices do not equal values, ethics, and principles. So when you're looking for a fatwa in fiqh, that's not shirk. Fatwa, because it's fiqh, because it's jurisprudence. You're asking about, in salah, is it okay if I stand this way? Where can I put my hands? When it comes to buying and selling, is it what can I eat? What can I got? Here, this is jurisprudence. These are laws and rulings. Islam is designed to have different opinions on these matters. They are not equal to values, ethics, and principles. I am talking about values, ethics, and principles are different. This is the importance of understanding these. Now, honestly, we could run a course just on this slide and just taking time to comprehend, because I'm finding out more and more that people don't seem to see the difference between the two things. For there to be different opinions on dogs and what you can do with dogs does not equal whether you can be honest or lie, whether you can eat haram or not eat haram, whether you can take riba or not, whether you can kill someone or not, whether you can backstab, that's not the same. These are values, these are principles that you live by. This is a jurisprudence ruling that imams have argued over a long period of time and concluded different opinions at the end of them. Nothing that we talk about in the Aqidah course, nothing of the imams, this is the important piece. This is why I think the three schools, you have to understand a little bit of them, because none of the three schools argue on the values, ethics, or principles, or the basics of who Allah is. None of them do. They argue on details that don't have effect on behavior and don't really change any of the essence of the basics or the fundamentals of what Islam is about. But if you understand this about Tawheed, then you understand why it's so important. So think about that. If you're a muwahhid, that means that your ethics are set. You will never, ever betray people, because that's your ethic. Because Allah told you it's not acceptable for you to betray. Because ghadr and khiyana is completely unacceptable. That's it. It doesn't matter who you're dealing with. It doesn't matter how hungry you are, how poor you are, how tired you are, how difficult life is. You don't betray. Right? Period. And it doesn't matter what situation I put you in, what time of life it is, that's going to be constant. It's like the waves of life can slap you around and throw you as much. You still know where your direction is. You still know what you stand for. And if we take out of Tawheed that, then it becomes, so you believe in one God or 5 or 15, right? I've had these, the reason I'm telling you this, because I've had long conversations with people who say, I'm friends with a Hindu person or friends with a pagan of some sort. I'm like, we're the same. Like, I don't see difference. I'm like, yeah. Unfortunately, that's how you don't understand where the difference comes in. Like, you're missing where the actual difference exists because you haven't understood what Tawheed is about. When you study any other faith, especially the faiths that have shirk in them, you know that when it comes to their ethics and values, they lack consistency. They lack consistency within them, because the values and ethics are argued within the faith. We don't have arguments in our faith on these issues. We argue fiqh. And tertiary topics. You'll see how tertiary they are. Like in this course, I'll show you the topic, and you're like, that's what they've been fighting about? Like, yeah. What do you think? And you're like, I don't really care. Like, it doesn't matter to me. To tell me what it is, it doesn't seem to make a difference. We don't argue the fundamentals. As Muslims sitting in this room, we agree on all of the values, all the basic values and principles. What we differ on are things that don't even have an effect on these topics. Unfortunately, though, at least those of us who are educated enough in Islam to know what the values and the ethics are, which is why I think it's important that that piece is understood of what the values and the ethics actually are. So Tawheed, or oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this piece of the course is important to me. I'm only going to do it now. After this, we move on to start studying the text in some degree of depth, but I need you to listen to this and think about it with some degree of clarity and contemplate it, because it will affect your how you deal with this discipline. Oneness of the source of values and ethics means people have a set of values that do not change and cannot be corrupted. They can't be corrupted because the source is not variable. It's not going to change later on. No one can come and influence it. No one can come and play around with it. It's going to stay the way it is. Regardless, zina is haram now. It was haram 1,000 years ago, and 2,000 years ago, and 1,000 years from now, it'll still be haram. No matter what they do, no matter what they change, zina will always be haram. Always. Nothing changes that. And the world can change in whatever the way the world wants to change. Muslims will still say, this is haram, and here's the alternative. It's marriage, and here are the boundaries of relationships, etc., etc. And that goes for everything in our deen. Yeah. The moment that's lost, that's Yawm al-Qiyamah. So Yawm al-Qiyamah is defined as when those are lost, meaning Islam is no longer, it doesn't have that, the set of values have somehow lost they don't exist, they lost their existence because Tawheed has been lost. The only way you're going to lose these set of values is when Tawheed doesn't exist anymore. As long as Tawheed is here, we'll still have these set of values because I can tell you whatever I want to tell you. The Quran is very clear on what the value is. If I sit here and argue that the permissibility of certain timings for zina, for as long as I want, at the end you're like, this guy is insane, and because the Quran is very clear on what is halal and what is not. The values, the red line was drawn by power much beyond, way beyond me. So we all agree to it and we accept it and we live by it. And that's important. It's very important. And Tawheed gives people the only chance they have as a society is to uphold high values. It's the only way a society can survive is it has Tawheed. Without Tawheed, as I told you, 2024, I can't imagine what 2124 is going to look like. Can't imagine. I can't even begin to imagine what the streets is going to look like and people walking down it. I can't imagine how people are going to be behaving because this society doesn't have Tawheed. So that line, as you know, is going to keep on being pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. Now we can't even, and now we have new pronouns and we have new species of human beings and we don't even know exactly what we can say and what we can't say. And this can keep on moving because there's no line for that. No one drew that line for the people here. So they're going to keep on pushing it. For us, it's drawn. Sorry. We know exactly where it's drawn. And that's where we stop. And these are the behaviors that are acceptable and those aren't. And then it goes into every other aspect of life. Riba is haram. I don't care what you say. It's never going to be halal. It's never going to change. There's a value. So yeah, they can keep on walking down a pathway of playing with finances and more usury until and collapse after collapse and collapse after collapse. But we will continue to see this. I mean, we may not be able to affect the world, but we will continue to see usury to be haram, and then it just keeps on going. The value system just keeps on going in that direction. So the only way a society can uphold values if it believes that the source of the values is divine, that you can't mess with it. You know how the Americans are when it comes to their founding fathers? They use that term a lot, right? That the founding fathers put that in. But they're just guys at the end. A couple of guys who were just sitting around a table. Most of them owned slaves, and many of them were very racist. But they sat down and they came up with the. But the reason that they go back to that is because the human being needs some source of values that they can see sacred, or else there's no way, there's no compass. How do you live? What do you do? There's no way to know what the right thing to do is. So it's very complicated. So people yearn for a source of values that is sacred that they can call their own. So even if they have to make something up and make people to be what they're not, and then call them something, if our founding, the people who stole land and murdered millions of other human beings to take the land that they took. Like, what do you? That's sacred to you. And then they use the Constitution as a sacred law because they have to have something. Masakeen, I feel bad because you and I so much easy. It's La ilaha illallah. It's the creator of the cosmos and the earth. It's the one who's beyond time and space, who put the lines for us, so it's much easier. I don't have to worry. I wouldn't follow if it was a human being who drew it. Yeah. Maybe you're more humble than me. I ain't following any rule about another human being. If a human put the rule, I'm going to challenge it every day of the week if I think it's dumb. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts it, that's it. Jalla Jalaluk. You said it's haram. I may not understand right now why, but I know. Because I know you, because we studied Aqeedah, I know you. So of course, if you said this is not going to be helpful, then I trust that. And then time will prove it, as always. It's easy, it's really not that difficult to comprehend. But that's why we talk about Tawheed. We don't lie, we don't steal, we don't inflict harm, we don't oppress or support oppression, ever. We don't accept oppression. Zulm, off the table, immediately. We will never stand by the oppressor. I don't care what the oppressed did. There's an oppressor, we're against that. Don't talk to me about the oppressed. Talk to me about the oppressor. When they're not oppressing anymore, then we'll turn to everyone. We'll have a cup of tea and figure out what the oppressed could have done better. We don't oppress, we don't fornicate, we don't intoxicate ourselves recreationally, we don't cheat or betray. These are the values that we uphold as Muslims. They don't change. I'm just giving you examples of some of these values. Haircuts, not value. It's a jurisprudent issue. No big deal if you had a weird haircut. As far as I'm concerned, if you come in here with a rainbow mohawk, I don't really care. Unless the value behind it is problematic, and then we'll talk about the value, really not the symptom that came with it. Because jurisprudence, there's room for discussion. There's room to interpret things differently. Scholars have different opinions. It exists. If you study Islam in depth, you understand that there's a lot there. But in theology, which is where we get our values, that's a whole different story. So that's what I want to share with you regarding Tawheed. So this is the beginning of the Matn of Imam al-Tahawi. So we have a translation here, which is very helpful. Jazakallah khair, Brother Emmanuel helped me put this together when I did the first time around. The translation is there for you to read. I'll probably just read the Arabic and just translate it as I go along. And then I'm going to go and actually break things down to you in a categorical way, systematically within slides, and we're going to go into depth. So we'll read this as the background kind of idea, and then we're going to go into depth into every idea. I'm not going to take each one on its own, but I'm going to actually take each concept on its own. So this is so make sure you have, today your job is, if you haven't heard the first maybe 35 minutes of this lecture, to go home and listen to that 35 minutes, because I do talk about stuff that are important. Like it's the premise of the basis of this course. So make sure you go back and listen to that. And then familiarize yourself with some of the material that I have there. You're not going to be tested if you're taking this course with the intention of being a credit student. You're not going to be tested on any of the extra reading material. You'll only be required to know what I have on these slides. I'm very simple. It's the stuff on the slides. The exam is open book, but I will ask you questions that require you to think and to answer and to actually articulate things. So it's not, you can't just copy. If you copy paste stuff, you fail. Like if you're just copying and pasting words from the thing, I'll know. Like you have to actually explain things. The part of this course that is mandatory is listening to the Facing Disbelief series. I put it together specifically for this course because it's a lot of 7 hours of material that putting into this course will make this course a nightmare to give. So I just ask you to listen to it on the side over the course of the next 13 or 14 weeks. So if you do a half an hour a week, you'll have something at the end. We will share a quiz or an assignment where you just have to press yes that you listen to it. And if you don't, then you don't pass the course, basically, if you care. And you're welcome to attend this course without any assessment at the end. Like anyone is welcome to come in and listen. I have no problem with that at all. You can have access to everything in the Google Classroom and still not take the exam. I have no problem with that at all. It's not an issue for me whatsoever. But if you do want to take the course and get the certificate and you're a part of the Imam Development Academy, you're trying to educate yourself and move from one course to the other, then this is a core course that you have to take and you have to make sure that you pass, because this is what a lot of the basis of a lot of our communication within the other topics is going to come from what we just learned here, and how we're going to view Islamic knowledge and Islamic opinion, and how we view our roles as muwahhideen and what that means. I'm going to explain this more as we go along, as obviously throughout the course. So it's 9:28. I'm going to end with that. We've been running for an hour and a half right now. An hour and 15 minutes, if we take out the 20 minutes so next week we'll start with reciting the first part of the Matn, and of course after that, we'll go directly, once we're done kind of going reading it, I'll go through the commentary, and we'll start breaking things down into some degree of depth. So you're welcome to here's this slide has the Facing Disbelief, the videos. So this is where you can actually access. So the slides has have everything that you need. Here you have the links to all the videos that I'm going to ask you to listen to, inshallah ta'ala. All right, so we'll end with that. Make sure that you have access to the Google Classroom. You're welcome to go through these slides and read them beforehand and prepare yourself. I actually encourage that, because the more you're kind of read stuff and prepared, you'll probably be able to follow along a little bit better. I do encourage you to take notes, because some stuff I say here will be like requirements on the exam. I may not detail it in the slides as much, but I detail it in my explanation. So I expect you to be taking some notes and kind of building your understanding of it. If you have any questions, obviously, after every session, there's maybe 10 minutes where you're welcome to come and ask me questions. I'm happy to ask, whether it's your sister or a brother, inshallah. جزاكم الله خير. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. جزاكم الله خير وبارك الله فيكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.